Hi, welcome to this week's edition of Blues Talk, where again, John, Dave and myself are going to look forward to the Six Nations and Ireland's game against Scotland and the other couple of matches that are on this weekend. So boys, first of all we start off with our victory over the Wolfhounds. We beat them, the Wolfhounds victory over Saxons, beat them 14-8 the weekend.
Yeah, it was a competent display. I don't think you could really say a whole lot much else about it. I mean, the conditions did not lend themselves to playing any real sort of adventurous rugby. To a certain extent, it was almost. I mean, we've seen it before. We've seen kind of a typical Schmidt performance in that, you know, the opposition can have as much ball as they like as long as it's slow ball, and then we just control what they do with it, and that's to a certain extent what we did. I mean, the lads had to make a huge number of tackles. I mean, fair play to them for doing it, but you know, they were kind of tackles. They were tackling guys who were being controlled and corralled and running into controlled situations a lot of the time.
Yeah, England were, I don't know if you'd call them dumb as a box of spanners, but they weren't really playing the conditions very well. There was a few times when I saw them taking a scrum on our 22, getting tackled on the 10-metre line and ending up knocking it on the halfway line, where they were in possession, but they were going backwards the whole time. So they should have been chipping us, they should have been kicking the corners, we should have as well, but they weren't, and they were just trying to run around us. They had, I didn't notice it myself, but commentators were saying that they had a lot of the flankers out on the wings, and they were pulling the game wide the whole time, which was a mad tactic.
You could see it though, as a breakdown, we just murdered them.
Yeah, when you think of the conditions, it was a mad tactic. Like, how was the ball going to get out there, and what was going to happen when it did, and you know, I don't know whether they thought it through fully, but. Fairly decent performance from us. I suppose the other thing that it really highlights is the way the game has gone. The pendulum has swung back in terms of kicking. The possession away nowadays is probably becoming a better tactic than keeping
hold. I think that was in the conditions as well, John. Like, it was a hindrance having the ball in that weather.
Absolutely, but I think that the game has gone back that way. Whereas it was like that in 2009, maybe with the Lions tour and all that, and South Africa in 2008 winning the Tri-Nations and the World Cup in 2007, but they deliberately changed the way the breakdown was refereed, the interpretation of the breakdown, so it wouldn't be like that, and I think it's swung back now because all the defences have developed again, and that's... I think
it's always been the thing in rugby about possession, but I mean, if you're going to kick, you kick well, and if you kick badly, you'll be punished. And I think Ireland, between Boss, Madigan, and indeed Keithley when he came on, all kicked well, whereas England didn't. And I mean, England, I suppose to a certain extent you could commend them for picking such a young team. I mean, they did pick a very young team, but on the other hand, they had no experience. They were extremely callow, and you could see it. You could see, like,
8 caps to 60 or something.
Isaac Boss was the lord and master of that match. I mean, he just had too much guile for the. He just knew exactly how to play the conditions because he's played them up dozens of times before in matches of even a higher standard than that or a higher level than that. So, I mean, I commend England for going with youth, but you know, they kind of they literally let them sink in the mud of Kingsholm.
At the same time, it was an A game, and what's the important thing out of it is that you test out whatever systems you achieve whatever objective you set out. If you win it, the fans are happy, but it doesn't really matter at the end of the day.
But I think Joe Schmidt will be, taking that as the next point, I think Joe Schmidt will be extremely happy with it. I mean, the back row I thought were excellent. O'Donnell, Ruddock and Copeland. Copeland was a guy I kind of had a bit, because he always looks. You always see him in the highlights, like he looks good ball in hand, but he really worked his arse off. I mean, in fairness to him,
was he going to be a hooray Henry?
He worked really hard. Halfbacks worked well. The centre partnership indeed worked well. Obviously, doing what they had to do, which was mostly defend, but they did it well.
They didn't get a massive amount of ball from Madigan, who ran it a lot himself.
But there was good effect. But there was a number of players who kind of put their hands up, and then there's another few fellas that, you know, the game kind of went away from them, and as a result they've kind of been jettisoned from the national squad as well.
Yeah, I think a couple of guys advanced their cause. I think one guy put his cause back, unfortunately, in Craig Gilroy, and I think I think
Marmion did as well too.
Yeah, I think Marmion did as well. I think some were unfortunate in that the conditions didn't allow them to either advance or, for example, I thought Felix Jones played very well, but he didn't get an opportunity to show what Felix Jones' unique selling point would be, which is breaking from deep and
He did
running
get
with the
another
ball.
try though, it wasn't him, wasn't it?
It was, but it was a sloppy pass and he hit the guy in the face. But I mean, everybody does that. I mean, it was just unlucky that it came the way it did. I mean, it was. I wouldn't blame either him or Gilroy to a certain extent. But what I mean is he didn't get a chance to do the things that Felix Jones does really, really well. But he did all the basics that you'd expect from a fullback really, really well. So,
Unspectacular but solid.
I think, as you say, I think Trimble and Marmion were the two guys who didn't do themselves any favours whatsoever. Or not Gilroy, sorry.
Well, we did score a couple of tries, so let me have a quick look.
Well, this is a typical, if you like, Isaac Boss. I mean, forward domination.
Like we marched this back about 15 metres there.
Yeah.
It's very well organised.
Again, we said it last week. It's a tactic that nearly every team is resorting to, and it seems to work for
The thing
most of them.
to watch here is Fergus McFadden. McFadden comes in on a dummy run, and that causes a split second's doubt in the English open side flanker. If you notice in the replay, he takes half a step to cover McFadden, and that means he can't get back across to cover Boss. So if you watch it again from the other angle, you'll see that he actually shifts his weight, and that's him out of the game.
And you can also see that Taylor was a bit of a scratch team as well because of the way that England defended him.
But I mean, it's a scratch team for both sides. Both sides are a scratch. So
There was experience in the Irish
now
team.
watch. He takes the weight. He shifts his weight to cover McFadden, and that leaves Boss a bit of a hole to come through.
Yeah, he had him.
Yeah, it was poor defending though.
Poor decision making.
The winger was the only guy who got a hand on him at all.
Yeah.
McFadden had a good solid game considering he wasn't perfect. He had a bit of wayward kicking a little bit, but you always get a good solid game out of Fergus McFadden. He's just mentally, he just seems to have the goods. He just, he gets stuck in. He makes the most out of what he has. He's tough.
And that was his first game back since the November International.
He has that kind of, on a mucky day like that, he's really pugnacious.
Yeah, he's a
He
good
never
front
gives
in
up.
your
He
team.
never gets, and he just refuses to be held in a tackle.
Well, that's what I like about him, and that's why I think long term, in certain terms of Leinster, I think he's the heir. I would see him, and I don't know if it's just me, but I would see him as the heir to Darcy.
Yeah.
Because so much of what Leinster do is about Darcy just getting over the gain line, maybe just 1 or 2 yards. Well, and McFadden has that same ball carrying ability.
He could well find himself in there. I think I heard him interviewed there a while ago, and he said that while he was on the wing, and he's happy enough on the wing that he moving in wouldn't be as big a deal. Actually, it was Luke Fitzgerald, I think, might have said it. Moving in wouldn't be as big a deal when you've had that experience, and whereas if you're younger in your career, moving in would be a huge thing. It's now that they have the experience, they've got the confidence, and they've got everything going on the wing, that it's easier to move in. Look at Tana Umanga, who reckoned that if he kept playing, he'd end up in the front row. He started on the wing and kept moving in and in and in.
But McFadden actually said to Smith last season, he said, look, I don't really care where I play, just pick me. And he said, okay, well, I'm going to pick you on the wing, but I'm going to guarantee you some games on the wing. And he took his opportunity. I mean, you can't deny him that.
No, he's quick as well. He's added to all his other little things. This is Mads, is it?
Yeah. Typical piece of Madigan improvisation. We've actually seen almost this identical try before in the RDS. I was trying to remember earlier what game it was where we got a penalty and he took it on the run and just plowed over. I just can't remember which game it was. I was looking for it earlier.
He had a fair bit to do as well, as you'll probably see here. Like it was about 4 guys that actually laid hands on him.
He's a tough bugger.
Yeah, he is.
But he was well tuned in. You were talking last week, Dave, about Leinster players being on their toes all the time.
Did he knock that on purpose, do you think?
It's hard to know, but
I knocked that on and I'll have a padlock. 4 guys.
Nice.
He beat them all.
But that's not the first time he scored that try. We've seen that try before, and it's one of those situations with Madigan. He has the power, he has the pace, and he has the step to get through. If he gets a head start on it, he has the
confidence to go for himself.
Exactly, yeah. But I think England would be disappointed in that they got caught kind of in 2 situations from the Boss try and from this one, where they really could have
and should have
stopped it, and because the failures weren't physical, they were cerebral. their defence wasn't switched on enough to stop Madigan in that case, and in the first case, Guy made a split-second bad choice, and Boss was through. So, I mean, I think they'd be annoyed. I think it was it John Callard or was it Mike Catt was coaching the England team? I think they'd be disappointed anyway with what happened.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing is that after all that, they were still camped on our line, or well, close-ish to our line coming up to the end of the game, and they could have got through and won the bloody thing.
Well, only that he knocked on just in the corner.
Yeah.
Freddie, was it?
Yeah, I think it was Freddie Burns. I think justice was done to a certain
He
extent.
passed to the linesman's face.
Yeah. I mean, we made a couple of mistakes. I mean, taking Boss off put us into a lot of trouble. I think his control was missed.
On a game like that, yeah.
People have talked about how Pienaar, sometimes Ulster play 9-man rugby. Pienaar takes all the pressure off Jackson,
Yeah.
and that's what Boss did. Boss took all the pressure off his back line by making all those decisions. And Marmion wasn't able to do that. Or wasn't experienced enough to do that. Wasn't experienced enough to have the skills to do that. But he might one day, you know. So
Yeah, so anyway, during the week the 34-man squad was announced, and because of, I suppose, that game, there was certainly a few notable absentees from it. Zebo, Gilroy, Boss, Archer, Kilcoyne, Strauss, Marmion were some names that I picked out that weren't included. And there were some interesting additions to the squad as well, like guys like Marty Moore, Copeland, Geordie Murphy as well, and a couple of the Ulster guys, Trimble and Toohey as well, were retained in.
Well, he kind of closed down any speculation in either the front row or the scrum half position, because he left exactly enough players to fulfil a match day 23 there. So the losers in the front row obviously were Kilcoyne and Archer. I know you're not an Archer fan, but I thought he actually scrummaged pretty well when he came on. He wasn't a heat-seeking missile
I can
around the
honestly
park.
say that is the best scrummaging performance I've seen out of Archer. I'm not taking the piss. It was actually a very good scrummaging performance. But stop clock tells the right time twice a day.
Yeah, he got the shove on a lot more than Marty Moore did. Marty Moore was, as I said, a heat-seeking missile around the park more than Archer was. But fair play to the guy. I think he can feel a little bit hard done by. And Kilcoyne as well had a fairly decent game and could feel a little bit hard.
Kilcoyne, I think Kilcoyne is unfortunate. I thought he played very well. He has been very impressive this season. I mean, he's got you can see that the run of games that he's got behind him has stood to him, and you can see him growing. His confidence, his ability to deal with different kinds of props. Is expanding every match he plays. So he's very unfortunate. The problem is that it's actually probably one of the strongest positions in the Irish team.
It's amazing the way it's turned around the last few seasons, because up to maybe 3 years ago we were just
very few, yeah.
And we were playing John Hayes until he was 49 or something.
Well, that's on the tight head side. I mean, the tight head side has developed as well. I mean,
yeah, there are more options. It's not as good as the loose head, but there are more options. But these guys are not necessarily out of it. He could easily, put one of them in or both of them in at some point later in the championship. I wouldn't be saying goodbye in the same way as Zebo wouldn't be saying goodbye. He was probably the highest profile person to be left out. But just to continue on the team, Boss and Marmion were the other two that were in on the third position. That was that there are now no choices for. I think Boss demonstrated he's comfortably ahead of Marmion, not for much longer, I'm sure. I mean, he's a lot older. But Marmion, everybody's been crowing for Marmion to get into the squad. I think they took him to America last year and didn't play him, and he didn't get in November. But his time will come. He's a great player, but Boss is comfortably ahead for now. In 2014, we'll see what happens in 2015. And meanwhile, back at Zebo, probably feel a bit hard done by, like the two props. I think he's got that X factor. Maybe he doesn't. I don't know what it is. Maybe he's not seen as so much of a team player as some. Like if you look at somebody like Trimble or McFadden, you'd go really solid, really good team player. Maybe he doesn't have the flair as Simon Zebo, but is that what he's looking for in these two games?
Well, I think the problem Zebo has to a certain extent is either he starts or he's not used to. It's a bit like Paddy Jackson to a certain extent. Last year during the autumn internationals, where Paddy Jackson was, he was the number 2 out half, but if he didn't start, he was no use on the bench because he didn't cover other positions. I think Simon Zebo's kind of the same.
Arguably, he covers full back and both wings.
Yeah, but so does every other wing and full back in the squad,
Maybe.
So I think he gets. Whereas you look at the other options. Maybe the guy who I think is the other option that it's either or is him and McFadden. And McFadden does cover inside positions, whereas Zebo doesn't. So I think he's unfortunate there. But the thing is,
still, if there was, it's not. He didn't announce the start in 23 or the 23-man match day team. He announced 34, and he didn't include Zebo in it.
No.
I was very surprised.
Yeah, it was a bit of a
I actually thought that he played very well when he came on.
I thought he played well when he came on as well. And it was a surprise. But what I'm saying is, if you actually sit back and look at it, you can actually see the reasoning behind it from what we know about it. I mean, for all we know, Simon Zebo could have come up and pants Joe Schmidt. But what I'm saying is, from what we can see, from what we know about the players, how they've played over the last 12 months, 18 months, whatever. You can see the reasons why a McFadden is more useful as a bench player than a Zebo is. That's why I say, if Zebo either starts
or he's no
good,
well,
and if he starts, that's fine, because he's a Lions winger. If he starts, he's grand, but on the bench, he's taking up a spot unless you get an injury in one or two fairly specialised positions.
Him and Strauss and probably Gilroy, who were the three that were drafted in late into the squad. They were originally left out because they were injured. They've all been sent back to their provinces to get a bit of fitness. But I wouldn't say Simon Zebo's Six Nation is over the same as
no, but
even less.
I do find like that. Is that just a platitude? Because I do find it a bit strange that McFadden has played less games, is included in the 34. Okay, I take your point, Dave, that he's a bit more versatile and covers centre and so on.
And he only had a hand injury rather than a leg injury, which. Yeah, but you
can still train.
You can train when you have a hand injury.
Well, Zebo's played in the Heineken Cup and he's played in an A International. Like, I mean, it's still a fairly reasonably high level.
I'm not saying that he shouldn't feel hard done by. He definitely should, but
for all we know, they could have gone in and done a bleep test or whatever on Monday, and Zebo's results weren't what they needed because, as you say, he's had a leg injury. He hasn't had a chance to build up that fitness. He's only just back from it. So. We don't know the full story, but what we can say is if you're picking a squad of 23 and you have a choice between two guys and one guy is only good for one position and the other guy's good for a couple of positions.
Well, I think you said it before we started, Dave, about Fergus McFadden might keep Ian Madigan out of the team if he's on the bench.
Well, that's what I've been thinking about.
But there's a couple of interesting selections that are going to need to be made, and sort of as you said, the front row kind of picks itself. Pretty much the second row, I'd imagine, is going to be O'Connell and Toner. It's just we'll get to the bench later, but then you've got the back row. And the back row there are a couple of spaces there available. It's going to be a shootout, I suppose, between Henry and O'Donnell, possibly.
Which Henry will win at the end of the day, I reckon.
Yeah, I think the only space is the open side flanker spot. And I think it's a case of probables versus possibles in terms of Henry versus O'Donnell. You can see, I mean, if I couldn't care less which of them plays because I know both of them will play.
I'd be happy to see them, but I think
I think Henry's the favourite in terms of.
Well, he started against Australia. He seemed to be kind of the man in possession to an extent.
I said earlier, Joe Schmidt has these little things where he picks a game which was maybe not quite the most important game of the season, and he'll put in a little surprise here or there. That surprise could be somebody like Luke Marshall. That surprise could be, I don't know, he'll start Marty Moore instead of Mike Ross. Unlikely, but possible. The surprise could be Henshaw on the bench and gets on for O'Driscoll at some point. The surprise, there's a few things he could do there. He could do something in the back row. He's left a lot of flexibility in the back row and the second row in terms of selection.
Well, you mentioned Henderson. I think Tui could possibly push McCarthy off the bench as well.
I think that he'll probably rest Mike McCarthy because of a bad facial injury. So you could either see Tui with somebody like Ruddock or Copeland, probably Ruddock, or you could see Ian Henderson as a second row cover with Tommy O'Donnell. And then you've got your 6 and your 7 covered. Let's face it, 8 rarely gets injured, and if he does, he can step across.
I think that a lot of it depends on. I mean, they're all interdependent relationships in the selection of the team. I think if McCarthy is fit to go, McCarthy gets the spot on the bench, and then you've got a more orthodox selection in terms of. He'll pick a player. He'll pick the player as back row cover who covers the most positions, whoever that may be.
That could even be Jordy Murphy.
It could.
You know?
Yeah, it could be. He does
I'd
cover
say he's the
positions.
least likely,
I'd say he's
but-
the least likely because he just doesn't have the games behind him.
Yeah.
If he goes with Henderson, then if McCarthy isn't available and he goes with Henderson, that opens up the bench to a certain extent to pretty much everyone. In that there's a slot there who could get it. He could go for a special 7 in O'Donnell, provided he's not starting. O'Donnell/Henry, whichever one doesn't start. If he has Henderson there, because he covers 6. Because McCarthy, you have to remember as well. Of course, the other side of that is McCarthy covers 6 as well, so that does give him the freedom to pick a special 7.
I'd rather have Henry at 6 than McCarthy, though, in fairness. McCarthy hasn't played 6 much recently, whereas Henderson has played a lot. In fact, he's been predominantly a 6 up until quite recently. And he has the pace as well. He's a real asset to have on the bench. I mean, he's got speed, he's got strength. For such a young guy, he's a great player.
He's not particularly dumb either. A lot of those young guys who come in who are very physical can be a bit stupid, and Henderson isn't. You see guys, I mean, he's a very good player, but Dan Toohey's as dumb as a bag of spanners. Like.
That's your perception of him, all right?
But you mentioned sort of someone like Zebo who can only start. Whereas I think Henderson offers so much when he comes off the bench, and I think the difference he makes to Ulster when he comes on, like I just think there seems to be this upness and pace and aggression and physicality. He's just I think he's a brilliant player. And
the other side of it is it might be a good game for Henderson to get some experience off the bench because I mean Scotland aren't.
Also, do you want Paul O'Connell and Devin Towner playing flat out for 80 minutes and then have to play Wales 6 days later? You know,
Scotland could be a good game for him to play himself into that level. You know, because I think he's better than any of the Scottish locks. Scotland have good locks, but you know their promise hasn't been matched by their achievement, shall we say? And I think Henderson would be able to dominate them if he were to come on after 50 minutes, we'll say. So personally I'd go with him, but I can see why somebody mightn't. And then you have the knock-on effects that if he goes with Henderson he can pick a specialist 7 or you know there's various different combinations. I mean the same combinations go on in the back 3 and in the centres as well, depending on selections.
Well, you mentioned Scotland there. I mean, they beat us last season and they beat us in 2010 in Croke Park. You know, like they're not a particularly good side, but they are improving. The problem is that they just can't score any tries. I think they scored 2 tries in their 3 matches two against the Box and 1 against Australia, and they scored 2 tries.
It's been a perennial problem for them. They just seem to, I don't know what it is, but if they can't win in multiples of 3, they ain't winning. And that's the kind of game they play. You know, be physical and go for penalties. So I'm hopeful and expecting that we'll be too strong for them, especially at home. But you can't take them for granted either. You know, look at it to us last year. They really, really frustrated us, and we had all the possession and all the. Bringing me back to my point again about the way the game has gone, that you're nearly better off without the ball again.
Don't forget that we had a very young Callow Jackson playing that day,
and we did have a terrible coach as well. In fairness, I mean, come on.
But Jackson, just lost. He had a kick in the first few minutes that he shanked wide, and I think that just knocked his confidence completely in the match, and he got pulled off it. I think about 50 minutes when Ron O'Gara had to come on in, and he had probably, I think, his worst game
for
Ireland. At his last game, I think. For Ireland.
Unfortunately, it's his last game.
I think last year's game. I mean, I don't think there's a whole lot we can learn from it in terms of either ourselves or Scotland. I mean, we've kind of swept. We've taken a dose of kidney salt since then, and you know, hopefully things are better.
Kidney fish.
One thing Scotland always have is its ability that no matter how poor a Scottish team has, it has the ability to drag you down to its level, and they've always had that.
Even going back to the John Jeffries days.
Yeah. Well, that was a good Scottish team.
It was, but my God, they just dragged you down into.
Yeah. They made you play the way that they wanted you to play, and that was the end of it. So Scottish teams always have that innate ability. This Scottish team is a very low quality Scottish team. It's probably the worst Scottish team I can remember. Now that's going back to certainly the early 80s.
I said the 1920s.
It's a poor Scottish team, and it's kind of indicative of the situation in Scottish rugby. You know, so if we go out there with the right attitude,
we should have too much for them.
We should have far too much for them. And we should be in a luxurious enough position that the coach can make changes at the 50-60 mark, you know.
And we should have the right attitude, let's face it.
Yeah.
You know, we should be going out there with the right attitude.
Yeah.
Scotland, though, will fancy it because it's the first game, and Scotland, the bigger the chance they're going to have is in their first game.
I heard a statistic that they hadn't won an opening game in the Six Nations for 10 years.
Wow.
So,
They
but then they've had probably their worst 10 years in Scottish
Well, that's
rugby
interesting,
history.
yeah.
Why don't we have a quick chat about the other matches of the weekend? Obviously, Wales play Italy. Italy have actually beaten Wales twice since they joined the Six Nations, but they haven't beaten them recently. Like Wales have kind of stepped up a level. But it was interesting to hear JJ Williams been interviewed during the week, and he mentioned that Gatland actually talks to the players and said, "Look, please don't go out and do too much for your club because I want you fitting round to go for Wales." It's a baffling attitude to have.
Well, it is, and it bit them on the ass last year, because you can't just switch it on and off like a tap. You can't just switch form on. You can't suddenly go out in the morning and say I'm going to play well. I mean, it just doesn't work like that.
Yeah, but they did. Like, if you remember the match again, like they opened the tournament against Ireland, and we hammered them in the first half.
Yeah.
They came back and actually won the second half, and then they won the subsequent 4 matches.
Yeah.
You know, so they won
So
a blip.
it cost them a grand slam.
Demolishing
If they'd
England.
gone out, you see, you can't. A player doesn't just switch mindsets, like flicking a switch. Only the very, very best can. I think that Wales will go into that game against Italy. I think that they're fortunate that they have
It's an ideal
Italy,
game for them, yeah.
because they can ramp up. Italy, even if they blitz them in the first half, aren't equipped to put 30 points on them, say the way that we did last year. So it gives Wales a chance to ramp up, and then they can hit the ground running.
The
as it
Boers
were.
don't have a 6-day turnaround the
No.
way we do either, you know, which is not great. Wonder will the 6-day turnaround, I know we finished dealing with selection, but I wonder will it influence Joe Schmidt's selection?
It may well do.
May
May well
as
do.
well, yeah.
But one guy
Might
actually
see a
won.
couple of guys who won't feature.
Yeah, and we didn't really talk too much about the reserve out half for Ireland. You know, whether it's going to be Madigan or Jackson.
Well, Ireland's second choice out half is Paddy Jackson, I think. Like I said about Zebo, either he starts or he's no good to you. Because there's a whole, like we were saying about back row, there's a whole set of interdependencies on the bench regarding centres and wings. If he picks McFadden, if he picks McFadden, say for example, as the reserve wing come 3/4, then he doesn't really need Ian Madigan, because Ian Madigan's ability to cover 10 and 12 is
15
superseded. Or 15.
Yeah, well,
It's-
15 can be covered by pretty much the whole back
three is superseded by McFadden's ability to cover it. So that might that might be an indicator to shoe in Jackson.
The other thing
On
is,
the other hand, if he decides to go with a more specialist winger, he might decide he needs to cover
Madigan,
somebody who
yeah.
can cover the centres, and that would bring Madigan in.
there's another factor there too, and something we were saying that Kidney should do last year and he never did, is the
Resign.
It's the fact that he had McFadden can kick. I know he hasn't kicked recently, but he can kick and he can kick well. And if Paddy Jackson has to come on and is having a shocker, you've got Fergus McFadden to take over from him. You know, Rob Kearney can kick too. I know, but like that's another reason why McFadden might select Jackson rather. You know, the selection of McFadden might select Jackson.
The other side of that is, of course, since then has Jackson had a shocker.
Yeah, he doesn't.
He hasn't done a whole lot of goal kicking, but I don't think since then anytime he's kicked well since then.
Yeah, I remember.
Sometimes these matches can act as a catalyst to actually get a player into the right mindset. You
But
know?
don't forget, it's Joe Schmidt coaching, and what did Joe Schmidt do with Ian Madigan for a year? He let Fergus
that's
McFadden
true.
and Easton Azewa kick, not because McFadden couldn't kick, but to expose him to all the other parts of his game without having to worry about
Well, I
kicking.
think it was during. It was
I
around-
think that's more Mark Anscombe's job now than Joe Schmidt's, if you like. I think he'll have looked at Mark Anscombe to do that. Maybe that's what Mark Anscombe has done.
No,
by-
I'm just saying that reason is why Joe Schmidt might look to Fergus McFadden to shield him.
But at the start of the season, when Ulster played the Ospreys, and Ruan Pino wasn't playing that particular day, and Ulster were beaten quite well. But up stepped Jackson that day, and he kicked about 15 points, I think, and he won the game for them. You know what I mean? So he can handle the pressure now.
Yeah, well, maybe because like you were saying, like what Joe Schmidt did with Madigan in terms of using other guys to cover him. Maybe Pinar has covered Jackson. Now the natural out half in him is asserting himself, and he's saying, "Hey, I'm the man. I want to be the kicker," kind of thing. So, but we see. But I think that the interdependencies on the bench determine, you know, which guy will be picked at out half. I think Madigan or Madigan offers more in terms of flexibility. I think Jackson is the better player at this point in time in terms of being an out half.
Yeah. Well, why don't we just chat about the other match, France against England?
It was beef.
That's a big one.
It is like, and it's like, if you think about it, it's French teams are three. There's 3 teams in the quarterfinals of the Heineken Cup. 3 of them won their groups. England have 2 teams in the Heineken Cup. Both of them were best runners up in their groups.
Of groups with Italian teams.
Yeah. So like, is there a bit of a shift there now this season?
It's hard to know. I mean, France have a number of injuries. The latest being Thalès is out. They've already lost Dusautoir and a couple of others.
They always win it after the Leinster, though.
England
Always.
England might be going somewhere, I think.
I love this about the Six Nations, actually, because every year
You never know. Because you haven't seen the teams for so long. I mean, whatever about the Autumn Internationals, right? The Autumn Internationals they don't operate at the same level as the Six Nations. So you've no real idea of form. The last game that we could really judge England on is nearly 12 months ago. It's a game against Wales. And sure, it's a totally different team at this stage in terms of the players and the players'
But
attitude.
you wonder if the continual influx of very high profile players into the French game is affecting their national team.
It has to be.
Clearly, it has to be.
Well, if you see JJ Williams there tipping who he was, he said, the Welsh, we're going to win it again. He was pretty much, he didn't quite say that, but he was pretty much saying, Ireland, they always underachieve. That's what they do. And I don't know. I find it
quite a blinkered approach, though. Really,
I find it very hard to call because apart from Scotland and Italy, the other 4 teams could all win it.
Yeah, like, it was interesting to hear
Conceivably.
Joe Schmidt. He actually said, well, he said he spoke to the IRFU about it, and he said basically what the goal of this season is, on his first full season in charge, is to win the 3 home games and to win at least one of the away games. And he said coming second in the league or in the championship would actually be a successful season. They clearly want to go and win all matches, but being realistic, he's looking for 4 victories in the season.
I think that's Joe just managing expectations.
Possibly,
I don't think I've ever seen a situation where Joe's entered a trophy that he didn't want to win.
No.
I think still win it with 4 victories quite easily.
That's true, but
as England or France are going to be, are going to lose a game this weekend.
I don't think Joe Schmidt would ever regard finishing runners up as a success. It's just not the way he's wired.
Like, even when he was asked, if he hadn't conceded, if they hadn't got that conversion against the All Blacks, it would have been a draw. And he said,
England against France is going to be interesting. It's hard to know. It's really hard to know.
It is.
These first games
I
of the season
find it very hard to call any of those games, and like Wales against us. The key games, I suppose, are Wales against us the next week, and then Wales against France the following week. So like whoever wins that series of games, England, France, Wales, Ireland, Wales, France. Obviously, if Wales win 3 of them, they're pretty much looking at a Grand Slam or very close. If if they go one for France, one for Wales, one for, what I mean, it's going to be down to the last weekend.
The championship could be very broken up like that, because I don't think there's a whole huge amount of difference between any of the teams. Scotland and Italy accepted, but certainly between ourselves, Wales, England, and France, I don't think there's a whole huge amount of quality between us.
On their day,
they can all beat each other. I mean, it's interesting you were saying about JJ Williams. Like, I remember, if you remember, during the late 80s, early 90s, Wales had a terrible team, an absolutely terrible team. And I mean, one season was rescued by beating England in Wembley, if you recall. But there was never a single season where Wales didn't go into a 5 or 6 Nations championship without firmly believing and actually genuinely believing that they were going to win it.
They have a different mentality in Ireland. Like, we kind of love to be the underdogs, whereas in Wales actually they consider themselves as good, if not better, than the Springboks and the All Blacks. They don't really they don't think we're just a stepping stone to.
They don't consider the Six Nations to be a tournament worthy of their talents. They think they are as good. I mean,
how many times have they beaten a Southern Hemisphere opposition under Gatland?
It's probably that's exactly it. But it's probably why their regions are in the state they're in, because they just can't accept the real Weltpolitik of the day.
Well, there's some other good news.
No,
there's been some other good news.
I just think it's symbolic of a mental state that exists in Welsh rugby.
Well, there's been some other good news in Irish rugby in the last few days. I suppose just briefly talk about the IRFU. They've signed a new contract with Canterbury, which is bringing some well-needed funds into their coffers. I think they signed a 6-year deal for 20 million.
Yeah.
Now it's replacing the Puma deal, which was 40 million over 8 years. So it works out at 3.3 million compared to 5 million per annum. But still, it's a healthy fill up to the union.
Well, that's it. I mean, the Puma deal was a big deal because Puma are a very, very big global brand in a variety of sports, and we fell prey to just basically to brand realignment, and that's why Puma wanted out. Canterbury are a smaller company, but are more specialist in rugby. They are rugby focused. I mean, they dabbled in other sports and it almost broke them, so they've kind of switched focus back towards rugby. So hopefully it'll be good. Canterbury have a long history producing fairly decent jerseys for a variety of teams in Ireland, so including Leinster indeed. So hopefully it'll give people what they want. I doubt it though. Some Irish people seem to think they know everything about jersey design, and very few of them know absolutely anything.
They did make the RFU did make another big signing since we recorded our programme last week, and can I just say yes, Mr. J.
He's looked for 3 years.
Was that since last week? It was, yeah. Yeah, great news.
So
completely confounded my expectations.
And they got all their men. They got O'Brien, they got O'Connell, they got Earls. They've got Zebo last season. I know, like maybe at the time. Conor Murray. They've Rob Carney. Like they have gone out and signed all their men.
Yeah.
And you know you have to like.
Oh no, you have to give the credit. I mean,
they made a monumental mistake with Cess. Yeah. And I'm sure they realise that now. Yeah. But they have gone and fixed it.
And they did. And from what I hear of Jamie Heaslip's, people took advantage of that monumental mistake to.
They seem to got a lot of money.
They squeezed an awful lot of money out of the RFU that they wouldn't have had to pay if they did their business.
But like
back in September.
That's true. We've got O'Driscoll coming off contract, central contract. We've got I don't think Darcy's on one, but we've got.
Well, the money all comes from basically essentially the same pot. You know what I mean? Like
it does,
regardless of whether it's from the IRFU, Leinster branch, the Munster branch.
But what he's talking about is it frees up more money to redistribute. If you've got, we say whatever Brian O'Driscoll's on, I don't know, I have no clue. We say 400,000 a year. That's an extra 400,000 that's going to be available.
Yep.
Throughout the IRFU wage bill next season. So maybe they realise, if they think, well, he's coming off, we can afford to pay X, Y, and Z a little bit more. And then there's other players. I mean, we're coming to the end of the golden generation, as it were. Ron O'Gara's gone off it. Sexton's left the country. He wasn't part of the generation. Darcy's coming to an end. O'Callaghan will be coming to an end. O'Driscoll, O'Connell. Those were all guys who would have been on pretty big contracts, and over the years. So that's a certain amount of funds will be freed up for the next generation of players that maybe help them come through. I still think that they're doing their business the wrong way. By letting the players get into a pre-free agency state, it's dangerous because when you let them go into the last 6 months of their contract, they're quite free to go and look at other offers. Get them nailed down before that happens. And most of them, almost all of them, have said we wanted this done over the summer or September. Get it done, then they don't even get a chance to talk.
There seems to be reluctance to sign anyone up for a very long term.
I was watching the Footballers Football Show on Sky, and they had Niall Quinn, John Carew, the Norwegian centre forward.
I don't know.
Yes, you do. You're pretending. They had Niall Quinn as a former club chairman, John Carew, former professional player, and they had an agent.
Is he Michael Carew's brother?
No, Carew. And they were all talking about things, and one of the things that they were talking about, Niall Quinn was talking about how hard it is to keep players motivated once they reach that pre-free agency stage of their contracts, because they've got offers coming in. They're free to listen to other offers. The club can't stop them taking other offers. They can approach whoever they want because they're in this situation. He says it's very, very hard if you're a team that's battling relegation or chasing promotion or chasing a European spot. If you've got a certain number of players, maybe key players, who have their minds on other things, it can be very, very difficult. And now, obviously,
that would be the opposite. Would they not want to be in the shop window for new?
Not really, because clubs don't sign players on the basis of a small stretch of time. But the point is, like, that never happens in Ireland. I mean, right up to the moment he stepped on the plane, Johnny Sexton gave his all for Leinster. Any of the rest of the Irish players, even if Polygon were leaving, you can be sure right up to the moment he stepped on the plane, he would have been given his all. So the idea of the head being turned, but what it does do is it leaves uncertainty and it causes uncertainty, and it does play on players' minds because it's their job. It's how they feed their families.
It's an interesting one, right? But I think whatever about the IRFU signing up all of our players and they're going to continue playing in Ireland for the next number of years, the big problem is who are we going to play against? Because the Welsh are continuing their exodus out of the clubs. They've signed Warburton.
We're going to find out this weekend, I reckon.
But it just seems a mess. Like, who are we going to play? Like, they've got to sort something out about the makeup of the Pro 12 next season, because
will there be a Pro 12?
Will there be a Pro 12?
Will we have a British and Irish league?
Last year, the Guardian
who knows?
did an examination of the cabinet papers from under the 30-year rule, and the Conservative government in England had a plan for the city of Liverpool. It's called Managed Decline. And they were basically going to let the city, they were going to slowly, bit by bit, reduce services, reduce funding, let the city basically become desolate. People would move out and they could just plough it into the ground. That's what the WRU are doing to the regions. I think that they're kind of in a process of managed decline. I think they want the regions to do something stupid. I think they want them to go to court. I think they want them to do something that will run them into the ground. The union can come in, sweep up the players, sign them up, and then restart the way they should have done in the first place.
I know I know that what the WRU would love. Whether it's going to happen that way, whether the regions will play into their hands in that fashion, I'm not so sure. And you know, what they've got, flawed and all as it is better than having to rebuild from total scratch. For most everybody concerned, and especially us, if there's going to be a rebel, and that would be my preferred option. It's interesting when you look at the other nations. If you look at Wales compared to Scotland, Ireland, and I'm not sure about Italy, but Welsh fans and Welsh commentators are constantly running down the rebel.
Constantly.
And have been for. No, it's not just recent.
Even that interview with JJ Williams,
Yeah.
he was very negative towards it. Oh, playing a second-rate league. Like, it's second-rate because you guys don't take it seriously.
Yeah.
You know, like, the Irish teams can only do what they continually do and constantly
Now,
do.
in fairness, nobody took it that seriously for the first 5 years or so. It was just a bit of a runaround. But it's built year on year on year, and it's got stronger. It's still not perfect, and it's obviously not going to be as good as a league that's been in existence in the top 14's case for 120 years or 100 years anyway. Where guys' great grandfathers have played in the bloody.
But the national leagues in England were only really established in the early 80s.
1982 with the Current League.
So, but even that is 3 times as long as the Rebel has been around. So you don't build a league overnight, and you don't build. And the Welsh probably have the hardest run of it as well, because they're well, compared to Ireland, their regions are not natural entities; they're manufactured entities, and they've never really caught fire the way when the provinces have been there for thousands of years, and they played rugby for 120 years.
In my search for actually that try that I was talking about earlier, where Madigan scored the try, one of the games I was going through various different games, and one of the games was Scarlets against Leinster from earlier this season, and it was on S4C, and if you remember at the time, it was the world's most bizarre commentary, because it was just the two lads having a chat, and occasionally they mentioned the game. But one of the things they were talking about, and it kind of reminded me of the way the GAA is organised in Ireland, is that they were saying, well, they were talking about reasons why the regions haven't taken off. One of the points they made was because Welsh are very parochial people. It's all about our village against the next village. It's not about, they don't think of the bigger picture of their region, of their shire, if you like. What they think about, it's very, very parochial. Well, and the club scene is
but also Cardiff City and Swansea Town, whatever they're called, are like, they're 2 soccer teams, and they get, I don't know, 20 odd thousand at each game. Like, people get in and support them. Like, what's going to happen if you were traditionally a Neath fan, and then you said, you know what, I like going to watch rugby, I like going to watch some of the best players in the world playing on my doorstep, and I go along to the Liberty Stadium. What happens to those people who've put their
souls
into that particular club that are just going to be let go, and then they can maybe go?
But the WRU did it before, in fairness. I mean, and it's no credit to them, but they did it before with Celtic Warriors. You know,
the point I was making earlier online was that.
And they didn't give a rat's ass about their fans either.
The WRU didn't want to do anything other than pay off the Millennium Stadium, and they still the same. But like in 2003, or I think it was 2003 when they founded the regions, they wanted private money, and there were 4 benefactors behind each region who stepped in and put their own money into it. Now, what that did was it got the teams off the ground and all of that. But it also got them away from the union, so the union were no longer in control. and they surrendered, if you like, control because they didn't want to finance it. They couldn't afford it,
Yeah.
as far as they were concerned, to finance it. So when the wheels started to come off this, and the Ospreys lost their Galacticos, and they're, basically the guys got a pain in their arse putting money into the regions. The regions were left depend on the kindness of the WRU, which, like you say, maybe it's managed decline, whatever it is, but it left the whole thing in a state where it wasn't controlled by the WRU like we are controlled by the IRFU, and it also wasn't able to stand on its own. So it's a bit of a basket case by default, and it's not fish or fowl. It's not a total standalone league, and it's not our standalone set of regions, and it's not a union controlled like you have in South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, Ireland, Scotland, and Italy. It's fallen in between the cracks, and
well, a lot of those
have to do
guys,
something to fix it, but I don't know what.
a lot of those private guys, with the possible exception of the guys behind Difford Steel, felt there's a whole big bag of difference between being Wales rich and being France rich. And when it came down to it, those guys just couldn't compete, and they weren't going to make money. I mean, it's very rare somebody makes money. I mean, you look at the clubs, even the top soccer clubs in Europe, they're all carrying massive amounts of debt, or most of them are anyway. It's very hard to make money out of a sport. It's very hard to make it in a small area like Wales.
But we were very lucky because about 10 or so years ago, when Matt Williams was coaching Leinster, there was rumours that he was going to go, and he was going to go to Saracens, and a number of ex-Leinster and Irish players, Fergus Slattery, Brennan Mullen and Hugo McNeil, approached the union and said, look, we can go and source some extra capital if you need it to retain the Sky in Leinster. And the IRFU said no thanks, and it was kind of just as well that they didn't go and take cash from somebody else, because you've got to answer the shareholders then.
And you're into you see, this is the problem with benefactors, because
it's not so bad if you have to answer to shareholders. It's when you have to answer to one guy.
Yeah, well, benefactors, and some of them can be. There's a guy behind Exeter, for example, who's a total benefactor, and he's an all-round good bloke, it appears, and he's just there because he's really into the team, and he's not making it his plaything in the way that somebody like Bruce Craig in Bath might be perceived to be doing. I don't know the man, but the problem, and the guy in Toulon is another great example, the comic book guy. He is pumping money into the thing, and you can hardly turn around to him and say, well, yeah, that's great, you pumped all this money in, now go home and sit in your arse and we'll do all the work. He's going to want an element of control, and it will become a plaything for him to some degree. And the problem with rich men and playthings is they get a pain in their arse with them eventually, and the next thing...
I think Pujolet is slightly different, being a pure Toulon man himself. I mean, there is an element of...
Well, look, I'm sorry to pick on him because
but you could say Mad Max.
You could say there's loads of other ones. I mean, there are great examples, and to a certain extent you're right about Pujolet as well, because he's still saying I'm paying the piper. I do want to at least call some of the tunes.
He might be doing it for the right reasons. I'm not saying that all these guys are wrong or bad. I'm just saying that there's a tendency when you control something or put that much money into it
to actually want to control it. I mean, the example I always use is Bristol. Bristol Shoguns, if you recall. They had some of the best players in the world. Their halfbacks were Pichot and Contepomi, if you recall. And then
David Corkery.
And when they had David Corkery, they had Kevin Maggs. I mean, they had a lot of good guys, a lot of good players. But then your man decided to pull all the funding. I think it might have been Shotton, might have been his name, I'm not sure. He owned Mitsubishi in the UK. He decided that he was sick and tired of trying to run a rugby club and trying to make money out of it, and he just withdrew all his funding when Bristol fell and went down. I think they dropped 2 or 3 divisions, but they're coming back now, obviously.
Or you could even mention, just at the start of professionalism, there was Richmond, I think, was owned by the guy, the snooker loopy guy,
and Newcastle as well.
Right,
Newcastle, they did the same thing. They Rob Andrew and all that.
Sir John Hall owned them. He left them in a slightly better position. He was I think he was more of a genuine benefactor than he had this idea of creating a super sports club in the northeast, and even when that fell apart, I think he still made sure that the club was able to be eased out of it without being saddled with debt, etc. But anyway, but there were loads of them. I mean, you look at what London Irish's full name is.
Yeah.
In terms of it's London Irish, Scottish, Richmond, blah blah blah. Because all those clubs fell and were folded into London Irish.
That's right.
Now they come back again, thankfully. But
Yeah. Well, anyway, lads, thanks very much. It was a fascinating chat, and thanks a million for watching. If you go into the Aviva Stadium on Sunday, enjoy. Cheers.